All right, we start in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Adventures in Truth podcast. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Jeffrey Smith. How are you, Jeff?
I am well, Jim. And you?
I'm doing well, cooking along here. Been quite the eventful past couple weeks. A couple weeks ago, we did a podcast on death, and since then, my father made his transition. Very interesting unfolding of events occurred. He had gone to get some information from his doctor to understand his options. He had some kind of brain tumor that they weren't really clear about, and it was kind of tangled up in the blood vessels and nerves in the brain. And so after getting that information, about 2 days after getting that information, he ended up aspirating on a pretzel and coded in his home. They were able to resuscitate him, broke a rib and punctured his lung in the process, but they resuscitated him enough that they could put him on life support and put him in a coma and all that stuff. And then there's a process that goes along with that. But it was kind of fascinating. We had talked a lot in that episode about some of the things that I'd been experiencing with other friends of mine who have died recently, and connecting with them and being able to focus my energy in a way that I can kind of dial into their experience of wherever they are now. And that's been really, really helpful and really cool at the same time, kind of being able to reach out to them in another experience without having anything sort of in the way of that. And so throughout this process with my dad, I have stayed very closely dialed into his energy and kind of just feeling into where he's been. This was while he was still ill, but was trying to deal with this process. And so when this situation came up, when the situation of him aspirating on the pretzel after having had the meeting with the doctors came up, it seemed really clear to me that he had made a decision. And that decision to me was that he chose to transition at this point rather than two things, either being a burden himself and also particularly being a burden to his significant other. I think that was really hard for him to watch. As much as he would have liked to, I think the paths didn't really present much of a viable option either way. So it just, my sense of it was, when I heard that had happened, my immediate response inside was, oh, okay, he made his choice. And that felt really good in that respect, in the sense that that really kind of aligned with who I knew he is, and in talking to my brothers, they actually felt a very similar kind of thing, although maybe not from the same perspective, but were willing to grant that and kind of get in alignment with it. So wanted to carry on our conversation a little bit more because it's been sort of a very fascinating, different experience. Where, like I'd said before, being able to, like with my buddy Scott, being able to get quiet and just sort of feeling for him was quite easy. And my sense of where he was and what was going on seemed very real and very powerful. And what I discovered in this most recent experience with my father is that has not been the case with my father. I have not been really able to connect with him on the other side like I have been able to connect with my other friends, and created a whole lot of interesting thought process and things, because it didn't make sense to me that he wasn't available. It's done now, so this should be a non-event. And I realized, and I thought more about this after we talked briefly yesterday, is that I found that I wanted to, in order to be in a clean space, I had to make sure I wasn't already carrying a story about our relationship, a story about what I think might be happening, because I was finding myself in my thought process kind of going a little a little negative about it. Like, well, he was a bit of a dick in life, and so this is sort of apropos. And like there was a challenge with connection. But again, that was something that was not new, but maybe in the end, that's in the end, the energy that it was about. And even after we talked, and I think you had said something about uh, you had added something to that. Right now is escaping me, but what I realized as I was thinking, when I stopped and went, wait a second, you're putting more story into this. You're adding some negative connotations to things, and you're making assumptions based on the story you have about the relationship you have with him. So
Mhm.
that in and of itself is going to prevent me from connecting, because that's a big kind of bubble of whatever that would be very challenging to feel into. So I thought, okay, shift that concept, because what we've talked about and what we talked about in the podcast was a bit more of a positive spin on things, in the sense that, one, they're always accessible. Two, that the people that transition are in a better place, quote unquote, meaning no longer encumbered by personality nonsense and things that encumber us in the human experience, or become things that get in the way for us. So as I was able to sort of sit into that and go, okay, so there isn't a negative, if there's not a negative experience here, what are the potential possibilities? Because when we were in the hospital, I could get a sense of him, but the sense was like he was way down this long, long, long hallway. So um, I felt like we were in his awareness, but there was not a close connection thing going on there. So I kind of went back to that energy, and started to get a sense of, I started to be able to see pictures of his face, and except it was like behind a wall with these pictures, and his face would flash. And the more I was feeling into it, I began to wonder if what was actually going on is that, while he may have chosen the transition, um, what he took with him was a lot of unfinished business, particularly with regard to his family, both current and past. Um, and what I mean is that in his physical world, he categorically refused to deal with, or even go look at, anything that had to do with his childhood, anything that had to do with his family. He just he wouldn't deal with it at all. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to deal with it. A half sister of his showed up about 2 years ago. He wanted nothing to do with her, wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't get engaged with, nothing, like no interest at all. So that had me kind of feeling like, okay, maybe he's actually in some other reality right now, some other reality was the only word I could come up with, but a space where that stuff is getting processed, because it was so heavy and dark for him, that I can't imagine that something has to happen in the transition for him to release the depth of that emotional content. Because in his mind, he had blanked out, had no memory of his life from like age 7 to age 13 or something like that. And swore that he'd never seen his father after the age of 7, except that he lived with his father for like a year and a half when he was 13. So so it was just kind of all this confusing information. But so as I started to release the negative impression of the story that I had, I started to get more impression of what might be occurring, that is actually not absent. He's just not readily available yet, in the form that I have experienced others who were more readily available. Does that make sense?
Right.
My buddy Gilbert, if you remember, he was my buddy that lived down in Mexico. That he's the one, when he passed, I had a difficult time, because for me, he was pretty PO'd about it. And so he had kind of retreated, and there was a real strong sense of it. Like he wasn't about wanting to have a nice conversation. He was just irritated about the process. But that also dovetailed into things that I know he struggled with on this plane, that he could never really let go of, and it directly related. So as I was thinking more, I'm seeing more correlations, because now I'm having more of a sense of my father, but not in the way that I have with others who were potentially in a better place, if that makes any sense. And that was a very long-winded beginning. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of that thus far before we take that to the next level.
Well, what I love about what we're talking about, Jim, is the adventure continues, in that one of the aspects about an adventure is parts of it are unknown. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an adventure. It would just be a repeat, right?
Exactly.
So what we're talking about is you've had a new experience. You're sharing it with us, and it's changing our paradigm, or it's adding another menu option of possibilities about our experience here on this planet. So how I would try to summarize that is, it's just another menu option, in that it's not cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
There's different options, different paths, different experiences. There may be even a whole bunch, and maybe the simplistic humanity part of all of this is that we want it to be simple and, like, all dogs go to heaven.
Yeah.
Well, maybe some don't. Maybe there's a variety of different places they go before they get to heaven.
Yeah.
We don't know all that, but what we do know is, if you have had the ability previously to connect with, and experience your friends and loved ones on the other side, in the life between lives, and you're not able to do that with your father, well, there's a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps the rest of the podcast will simply be sharing some conjecture about what that might be, or why that might be. And I think it's going to be fascinating.
Well, and I think the thing that stands out to me most in that, and I think the aha moment in wanting to create some form of connection. I'm going to backtrack story here a little bit to backfill some of the stuff that I'm about to talk about. So one of the things that I have 3 younger brothers, and this was their very first experience. I have one brother that's 52, and then twins that are 49. And none of them have experienced close death in their lives. None of them have participated in the process of someone's transition ever. So I was really cognizant and aware of wanting to make sure that we were all talking as much as possible, that people could talk about whatever was going on for them, or however they were feeling, or whatever they were experiencing. And I was also trying to probe and kind of get them into a space of feeling this process differently than what they might perceive it to be, based on what everybody's perception is of the death and dying process. And it's hard, and it's arduous, and it's miserable, and it's all of these things. And so one of the things that happened is, as a result of this whole experience, and particularly being around his other family, this is the woman who he's been with for 20 some years, and the differences that existed, just blatantly different things about how he handled himself within that family versus how he handled himself with us. And that became one of the things that became a real big challenge was the fact that the recognition that he didn't make any attempts to connect, that connection has been an issue since day one, as far as I can tell. At least with me, that was the case. I kind of thought that my other brothers, particularly the twins, because there was a 6-year difference between me and my brother and the twins, that they got a bit more, or a lot more connection than I got. Come to find out, that wasn't the case at all. He was true to his nature for pretty much, he became more open, and he became more easy about things. But even this stuff that I was telling you about before, we're feeling like maybe he's sifting and sorting through some of the stuff he couldn't deal with here. Um, uh, there was never really connection. There just wasn't connection. We all talked about sitting at his bedside, being able to touch him, and caress him or touch his hair. I mean, both 2 or 3 times, one of the brothers were like, "God, his hair's so soft," because his hair is like mine, only even more intent, more straight, and looks like if you touch it, you'd hurt yourself kind of hair. Like it just didn't look soft, and for whatever, it's just such a bizarre thing. But they'd touch his forehead or run their hand through his hair and be like, "Oh my gosh, his hair is so soft."
Mm.
And then his skin was so touchable, and realizing that we never had that experience with this man. And so we were all sitting around somewhere along the way, and each of the boys was kind of venting a little about what he didn't do, and the challenges they were having or have had with him, and so interesting, the parallels that we didn't really realize were all pretty much the same. And at one point I said, I think the issue here is that connection was never on the menu, as you were saying about the menu before. That was my statement to them. That was never on the menu for us. It's not like it was there and we missed it, or we ignored it or didn't pay attention to it. It wasn't offered. And that's a huge thing to understand about your relationship with someone, is, especially as a kid, gosh, the idea that you can't connect with your dad in some meaningful way so seems to be like an impossibility. But I know I probably did it as a younger child, but once it was clear the lay of our relationship, that really didn't become a thing for me. But for the other 3 brothers, it was like this sort of continual thing over time. He would create these fishing trips, so that everybody could get together and go out and fish in the middle of nowhere, because he liked to fly fish. And in the end, the boy's experience of it after having done it 3 or 4 times was that he just wanted people there who would pick up one of the bill. So he could bring, so why not bring the boys? Because they can pick up, they can foot part of the bill and we can go do this. Because apparently when they were there, he was an absolute jerk. I mean, it was just not pleasant. And apparently after the last one, it was really not pleasant. But, and I don't mean this as a bashing thing, because it's not at all. The man showed up, he did his job. He created 4 very successful, healthy, pretty well-balanced men who are walking the earth now doing their thing. That couldn't have happened had the environment that he created not been there. So, in the end, regardless of what I think I didn't get or didn't get, what I got was exactly what I needed, because it propelled, and all of us did, because it propelled us down the paths that we all chose to find our own self-fulfillment, to find our own sense of connection, to find all of that stuff. And that we couldn't bring that back to him in a meaningful way seems a little frustrating. But I don't even think that's true. Because again, as I was saying before about part of the story is all the stuff I was just telling you. But the interesting thing is that there were many moments over the last 2 months as he was getting sicker and as things were going on, that there were incidences and situations that occurred, like stuff that happened with one of the twins that was about me. I wasn't there for it, but he was there to experience my dad having a very emotional experience for why he had allowed things to deteriorate to the degree that they had. Why didn't he stop that when he knew he should have, kind of thing. On my end, it's one of those too little too late things. It would have been years, and that's all fine and good. And it's not on my, I even said to him in the hospital, "Dad, we're good. We're good. We did our rounds. We went round and round, and we came back around. But in the end, we're good. I'm good with you. I'm good with where we're at, and I hope you are feeling the same." So this idea that we use the story can really get in the way of how we can heal from these situations when we when we stay too focused in what our story is about the relationship instead of completely releasing any concept of it so that you can find out what the new relationship is.
Uh-huh.
That,
So in summary, right now you're willing to say, my dad didn't connect with us when he was on the planet and in our lives or had the opportunity to be, and he's stuck with that. So even in the state place that he's in now, the switch is still off with regard to connection.
that is a very strong potential. Although again, I think the way you worded that has me really thinking. Because what I've since been seeing, as I was saying before, what my sense has been is he is there and I can feel him, but he's in a space that I can't get to. Whether that's because I'm here and he's there, probably part of it. Part of it could be because it's not meant to be for me to be in his space right now because his space is trying to resolve. And so added energy in that is not what's going to solve his energy.
He could be a little busy right now. They're the life review, meet and greet with ancient elders and ancestors. And he could be a little busy right now. It's possible. And what's also possible is that it's not like you had an intense connection with him and now it's gone and absent and you don't know how to connect, and he would need to be available to you to give you a sense and still have some of his energy there for you. You never had it, so you still don't need it. You didn't need it. You didn't get it. You didn't need it. You're not able to get it now. You still don't need it. So there is a consistency there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, the idea of there's so many concepts in here that are so powerful. Being able to, I think the biggest thing that for me and wanting to talk about it in the podcast is, especially for the listeners who may have limited experience or don't have any experience or have plenty of experience. One of the things that showed up as I knew that he was going to be transitioning, or my sense was that he was, it just didn't look like, from my vantage point and where he was, it didn't look like there was a whole lot of promise that there was going to be some, miracle shift go on to change his whole physical thing. I got lost in my own. Sometimes when I talk myself right out of what I was thinking. And it was really important. It was really
come back.
Important to the.
You were talking about listeners that might not have a lot of experience with this, and like you were going to perhaps give them an insight or something.
It started with in the realization that knowing he was going to transition and it being apparent. I have seen and heard over the years, many people talk about the passing of their parents, and one parent or the other parent, depending, or both, whatever. But the thing that always struck me is they always talk about this experience of this big hole in my heart and this emptiness and this loss that I feel, and all of this energy is just heavy, and even years later, there's still that sense, internally, some family on the other side of my relationship talk about their mom all the time, and she's been gone for, I think, close to 15 years. And just the mention can bring tears. And it's baffling because I love my mom. I love my dad. It isn't. So I was kind of, in my own weird scientific bizarro way, very intrigued about what that experience was going to be. Because I thought, wow, that's pretty intense. That's a pretty powerful experience. And so trying to be as conscious of the whole process as possible, like as I was with my friends, is like I I was looking for that experience, but then realized, like with my dad, I think whatever we could have done, we did. Um, I don't know that there was anywhere I could have gone differently based on who I am and based on who he is. So the only thing I could do was show up at this stage of his life and things that were going on. Is that I could show up. I could show up and be the space, be as unconditional as possible, just holding space for him to do what he needed to do so he could be as clean as he could be to go on about his business, and as far as the transition is concerned. Um, and even in the hospital room, there was probably 12 or so people of us there going through this process. And I'm so appreciative of the fact that, that I got to talk, really kind of head on with my brothers and kind of get a sense of where they were at about in the process, and my mom. And there was a lot of laughter in the room. There were moments when there were tears, but it wasn't this big, heavy melodrama. It was just a process, which to me is what it seems like it should be. It should just be a process. He's trying to get the hell out of here. How can I help him do that? Like, and I don't mean good riddance, get out, I mean, it's obvious this is, why sit here and expect a miracle? It's okay to want a miracle, but the reality is, if he was aware, I mean, how do I say this? He would not want to be there in that condition, in that fashion. He would not want that. If he was able to make that choice, if he was conscious enough, because he was already pretty much gone. But that would not be his preference, would be to be laying there having people bemoaning over him.
Right.
I don't know if that's just again, is that an individual thing, or is that something we can really kind of step into? Everyone can kind of step into that space. And, if there's unresolved stuff, deal with your stuff. It may be with them, but ultimately the issue is yours. My issues with my dad were not my dad's issues. He had other issues. He had plenty of them, but they were other issues. They weren't the issues I was having. So over the years, I got to deal with my own issues, and his issues were his. So he could continue to be who he was. And I got better and better at being good about the relationship. And he got better about it because he was able to make some transitions and changes and adjustments and discoveries of his own that enabled him to broaden and evolve in ways that he hadn't earlier in our lives. But my point is that, and I don't want to sound callous, but it's kind of one of those sweep your own sidewalk deals. If you can go into the process in a way that you're staying open and connected, you're watching nature happen. You're watching evolution take place. And that in and of itself is really absolutely fascinating. To be able to sit in a hospital room and feel your way into the experience of the person who's going through the process radically changes anything you could think about the process. It can't help but change it, and I giggle to myself because as I've shared some of this stuff with you and as we're talking about it, I sometimes will hear in my head people saying, well, that's a really creative story. Or gee, that's really interesting, but you probably made it up. And my answer to that is, so what? If I did, and my heart's happy, and I feel like I've done the best I can, and I'm not living in some delusion, and I don't come home and pound the wall, so what? Maybe I'm not completely 100% correct, but boy, it sure feels pretty on target. And the more I cannot ascribe negative connotation to all of it, the better it gets. The more clear it becomes, the more powerful it becomes, because I'm not bringing baggage to his process. It's his process. I have mine. That's mine, and I can deal with mine when I'm in my space. But I'm in his space. It's his process. How do I show up for his process? Because that's what the focus is right now, or was right then. So to those, those out there listening, this is, it has a lot of weight to it, the subject. It has a lot of intensity to it. And that's already going to be there. Like, regardless of what happens, regardless of relationship, regardless of any of it, there is a level of intensity and there is a level of overwhelmedness that happens through the process that you cannot do anything about, except allow it. So focus your energy into supporting the person who's doing the transition, and allow yourself to be as open as possible to the connections that you're going to make, so that you can feel your way to their experience when that time comes, when you feel ready for that. Because the amount of peace that it brings, in my experience, is so far greater than anything else. Because it's one of those, it is what it is deals. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm trying to segue this so that I'm talking a lot, and I want to bring you into the conversation.
Can we go back to the part where you were sharing about somebody sounded like in your family, the mere mention of their mother passing some 15 years ago will bring emotion up like it's right on the surface.
Yep.
So if we could use that as if it's happening for them, it's probably happening to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
So what hasn't happened in those 15 years is the I'm okay without them script. That I can be okay without that level of connection I had with that person, or maybe I never had connection with them and I really thought I had to have it, and now I know I'm not going to get it, so that really F's me up every time the issue comes up. So it could be either way. I really had it. It was really awesome, and they were my best friend. You hear about that, kids and their
absolutely
best friends. And now they're gone, and I don't know how to be okay without them here. And that's the mission. The mission is you are now challenged to be okay without them here.
Well, that's where I think the thing that's so important at this stage is to say, you can experience them. It's different. It's different. Right. It's never going to be what it was because they're not physically present here, but it can be even greater because they're not stuck in the limitations that we are.
Right. Well, think about our relationship, you and me. Mm-hmm. It's coming up on a year that you have moved. If you think about that.
Yes.
Coming up, not quite, but coming up.
Just a couple months.
And in that time, I haven't seen you in the physical in that time.
True.
Right?
Right.
And has our relationship changed?
Mm-hmm.
Has it maybe even gotten closer? Because we're still in contact with each other. We now have more data, more bits of data to add to our story of you in my life and me in your life.
Yeah.
But the physical interactions, I haven't given you a hug, haven't, shaken your hand, haven't been in your physical energy in a year. So I love this analogy that we're using, that we've maintained a connection. And sure, people would say, well, yeah, but you're both still on the planet. And now you're using technology, to do this piece here that we didn't do before.
Yeah.
But I love the metaphor or the analogy, whichever one it is.
Differently.
Yeah.
We chose
we wanted to continue the relationship. We wanted to continue the project, and found a way to do it.
And we have also, in the course of that, sought ways to get it even better and cleaner and clearer and less, wiring the computer so that we don't get glitches when we're talking. There's been a ton of little adjustments that we've had to make on both ends to come to a point of mutual satisfaction that the connection we are creating feels good for both of us and feels like it's clean and it's providing, in this case, it's providing a quality product. But it's so cool. That analogy that you used is so powerful because I don't see that that it really is any different. You know, that special relationship that you have with your mom, who you can pick up the phone and talk to, and yeah, you still can. And if you want to pick up a phone and act like you're talking to her, pick up the damn phone and act like you're talking to her.
Oh, I love that. Why not? Yeah.
Because it's the closest you're going to get physically, but it puts you in a receptive space, because that's the space you remember as our connection. So you're actually recreating connection, and she hasn't gone anywhere, so she can dial right in. She's like, or whoever it is can be there if you're willing to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sometimes where people might get a little freaked out, is there's physical experience with that. That's the way you know you're connecting. We don't pay attention to the fact that, I was thinking as you were talking, wasn't very long ago, maybe 2 sessions ago, we had a fairly lengthy conversation about what happened to your energy and where did your energy go. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I was asking you about, so we had not had podcasts for a couple weeks because of all the things that were going on. And I had inquired about the state of your energy because I couldn't find you. Because that's my thing, with people I'm close to. If I haven't talked to them, I reach out and I want to kind of feel for where they are. And I kept not finding you. And then we talked about it, and discovered something that was pretty amazing and pretty remarkable. And, but that came about because, again, being willing to adjust. And, yeah, okay, so I could pick up the phone or we could talk on Skype or whatever, but it's still a question of, how do I communicate in this relationship? You're still having a relationship. The idea that you've lost something that one's a little tougher for me to kind of wrap my brain around. Because, yeah, they're not here, but like my dad, if I saw him once a year, that was a lot. I mean, sometimes I'd see him more than that, but for the most part, he wasn't present in my physical reality, and most of the time.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's never going to be present in my physical reality anymore is kind of pointless to me. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
It doesn't really hold a whole ton of value to me. So I have to say, if I want a relationship, if I want to get a sense of how is he experiencing the other side, I got to find a way to have that communication that's unencumbered by whatever nonsense or stories I've created about that relationship. It doesn't mean we can't communicate about issues or stuff or try to get better understanding of things. But because he's no longer encumbered by that whole personality thing, the likelihood is that the presentation and the information is not going to be mired down in minutia. It's going to be feeling. It's going to be, I love you. It's going to be, there may have been lots of things that happened that didn't feel good, but know that I feel good now and I feel good for you now. And that is everything. Because, I mean, even talking about it is making me emotional, because that desire to connect is so strong in all of us. He can't be lacking that, right?
Right.
He can't be lacking. Nobody lacks that. They may not use it. They may not feel comfortable with it. They may not know how, but it's there. And it's just a question of when this whole thing drops away and suddenly you're reconnected, you're totally plugged in. I can imagine that experience must be a little bit overwhelming. If you've dimmed your light to a point that it's only like 30% or 40%, and suddenly you're back out at 100%, I could imagine that would be a little overwhelming for a minute.
I agree.
So
there was a couple of things that came up while we've been chatting. One is, would we be bold enough to just make a wild ass guess on percentages of, from your experience, people that have transitioned that you've been able to connect with and have a sense of connection with, versus those that have transitioned and you reached out and couldn't? What would you rough guess, throw in a percentage of each of those categories?
Well, I'll use the 4 immediate ones because there's been 4 in the last 2 years. First one easy, second one not so easy, third one easy, fourth one really challenging.
So 25% just
Yeah,
from your personal experience?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because
From my
even, I mean, Gilbert was an interesting one, but he wasn't inaccessible. He was not. It wasn't inaccessible like this is like with my dad. It was clearly him being kind of not very happy about the way stuff went down. Um, and it took a while, and he never really got to a place of the joy that I knew of Gilbert. In my experience, I never got that sense with him yet. Um, but he was more present. Timothy and Scotty, uh, both kind of like giddy, you know, really powerful experiences. And then of course, Dad was, as we talked about, was definitely has been more challenging and is evolving.
from my clinical experiences of playing around with the idea of what I call afterlife connections, I would say that it's about 10% from my, again, experiences in the office where I'm making it an option to people that want to rekindle a connection, or that they're bold enough to consider that that's still possible, and we give it a try, that it's 90% some hits, some sense of connection, some goosebumps, some inspiration, some intuitive notion that they either get a vision, an emotion, a physical kinesthetic experience,
Mhm.
a thought, an idea. I mean, they come in all different ways. It's not the same all the time. And the one or two times where that hasn't happened um, has really been obviously the vast minority. And in those times, prior to you sharing what you shared with me yesterday, I always thought it was the person just being fearful that I shouldn't be doing this, because maybe they're coming from the church where they were taught it's wrong or evil or sinful to communicate with the dead. It's in the Bible somewhere. I can't quote chapter or verse to you. Even though it's okay to talk to Jesus, who, if you follow that story, he's a dead guy. Isn't that kind of funny?
Yes. Uh,
So I thought it was fear on the requester's part rather than the person we're trying to reach out to. But what you're sharing is, and it really made me think yesterday after we got done talking on the phone, I was just thinking, well, wow, perhaps your dad, it's a perhaps thing,
mhm.
is really still staying true to his soul contract that he made with you and the kids, your brothers, of I'm not here to connect with you. And you guys are going to have to learn to love and accept yourselves without me as your father helping you learn to do that part. And he's staying consistent with that. And you may find that you signed up, created, initiated a life path where from day one all the way to the end of your days, you don't get that from your dad. And it's not because it's not possible. It's because you arranged it that way. I'm not saying that is what it is. I'm saying that is a possibility until one or both of you decide you don't want it to be that way any longer, which I also think is a possibility.
Well, that was actually what you just shared was the catalyst for me to stop and say, okay, I heard the words, but for me that attributes a negative for me that attributed a negative that how do I say this? So, in the contract, the idea of the contract and the continued behavior to me seemed like a negative attribution, only because if we're not encumbered by the personality nonsense, there's then there would be no potential, there would be no negative energy or no negative force in play. And particularly with the idea of a contract, to me, that would be done with the passing, with the transition. Like the
But
transition
we
happens.
don't know that.
No, we don't.
We would
I'm
think,
assuming that.
but what if it's your contract, not his? You know, unless there was a caveat in the contract somewhere that upon your passing, Dad, you can now have a connection with me. And when I'm in my 50s, I'll finally get the dad I never had when I was on the planet. It'd be like,
oh, well, see, part of the challenge there is that that's not a motivating factor at all anyway. That whole thought process to me doesn't make sense. My dad, you know, and as much as, you know, people might want to beat me over the head for this one, the function of my dad as a dad ended probably around the time I was 8 or 10 years old. I think that's true for all of us, honest to God. I think that there may be relationship that happens continuing into the future, but the criteria for the relationship is established early on and doesn't change. It may evolve. It may become something different over time, depending on how each person evolves and grows, you know, and you have that come to Jesus kind of thing, you know, when the child is old enough to put all the rational thoughts together and then confront the parent for the things they didn't do for me and how you didn't show up for me and how blah, 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 blah. That all happened the first 10 years of my life. And I think it was probably shorter than that. I think it was probably more like the first 7 or 8 years of my life. I am going to go out on a limb and say that this is more than likely true for most humans in this experience. So the idea that at 50, I would be trying to cultivate that relationship seems like an inordinate waste of energy and time. Because if I haven't found that relationship in myself at 50, that's where the problem is.
mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with the dead guy in the other room. It's got everything to do with the person who's still in the world who's not functioning. So that's that for me is that doesn't go anywhere, because but I do know and have heard and have witnessed people have that experience, you know, at 30, 40, 50 years old. Well, why didn't you give me what I wanted? Why didn't you give me what I needed? If you're trying to connect with a loved one to have that conversation, chances are good it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Chances are good it's going to be a huge exercise in frustration. When you were talking, it also reminded me too that at some point, and maybe now's a good time, but to sort of step by step this a little bit for people if they want to practice or play with it or explore it, because it doesn't have to be someone who has passed immediately. It doesn't have to be there's no real rule to this. It's I want to connect. So how do I do that? I go into a quiet place, I tap into my breath, and I get quiet. And then I just start feeling for whoever it is I'm wanting to connect with. Now, what does that mean? Feeling for them is remembering their essence. It's being tickled by the things that you loved about them. Maybe it wasn't a great relationship, but there's a core there that you can connect with just by feeling, just by wanting to be in that energy.
Right.
And that experience in and of itself can create an emotional response. So you may go there, you may be feeling for it, and then all of a sudden you're bawling and you have no idea why. Or you're in your shit and you're bawling and you're pissed and you're upset and you're all these things, or you're lonely and you're miserable. That's all good. That's your story about the relationship. That's not the relationship. So sit in that feeling, let it pass. It will pass. What comes after is what's most important. Once you surrender that story and are willing to let that lay as it is and recognize, okay, I'm having these feelings. It's okay. I'm going to stay in this space and continue to connect. Once you go past the bubble that you've put in the relationship there, then you're connecting. and then you'll start to have experiences. And again, to Jeff's point earlier, there's no limit to what that can be. For me, it's been a very visceral thing. Like I call it sort of a three-dimensional experience. It's not linear thought at all. I don't know that it's ever linear thought at all. To me, it's always an experience. It's that tingly sensation that goes through your body. It's that all of a sudden having this sense, this experience happening in your body that you're like, why am I having this experience? That to me is a moment of connection with someone on the other side. And if you're willing to sit in it and stay quiet in it and feel in it, there's tons of great shit in there. Good feeling stuff, connections, understanding. And then as you get more comfortable in the space, you can focus your energy a little more to being able to ask questions and I don't think of it in terms of asking like a direct question. Again, it's more sharing an energy. There's a question mark in my energy, and I'm going to share my question mark and see what comes back. You may use words. I mean, the challenge sometimes with words is that you want to make sure that you're not choosing words that are about your story. You know what I mean? Like when you're at a place where you're comfortable and you feel and have a sense of that person and you're used to allowing that openness, then you can start to ask more direct questions because you're not talking through your story. You're connecting through the energy. Did all that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What I would add to that is the reason that words wouldn't necessarily work is because they're left brain, and the connection that we're creating is happening over in the right brain. And so we have to translate. We have to do that translation ourselves, as well as the person we're connecting with isn't going to be able to communicate to your left brain with words. The communication will happen right brain to their energy, and then right brain is able to translate back into words. But that's a skill that you have to learn how to employ.
Yes.
So initially, I don't know if I could give an example. If I'm thinking about my grandfather right now, imagining the two of us walking on the beach together when I used to do that as a little boy, I can see the two of us right now walking on the beach together. And, he's telling me about his current experiences with my grandmother, how the two of them have been reunited and they just enjoy the experience of waiting for the rest of the family to get there as we all renew our next soul contracts and, get ready for our next incarnation. And, those are ideas. Those were thoughts that I just communicated. And the way I understand that is much like a sound wave uses our eardrum to vibrate, and then the eardrum hits certain little cilia, and I don't know how the whole thing happens that we experience sound. And then our left brain categorizes those sounds in different compartments and different notes and different things, and we have this experience of sound. Well, the afterlife energy is also using our mind in the form of thoughts. Mm-hmm. So we think there are thoughts, but like, is the sound wave coming from my voice to your ear? It's not your sound wave. It's my sound wave I'm sending out that's coming to your ear. I'm using your ear for you to hear me. Mm-hmm. So we think sometimes...
And actually, even to clarify that even more, I mean, you got to think of it as a tuner receiver thing. All you're doing is projecting. You're projecting a vibration. You're projecting a frequency. I'm choosing to dial into your frequency. I'm choosing to bring my focus and my tuners to say, oh, I want to know what this individual is transmitting. I want to have an experience of that.
Right. So oftentimes when people are learning how to do this connection with, people in the afterlife, I hear people sometimes afterwards, ego will jump in or the critical mind will jump in and say, I just made that up. And I'm like, well, you can believe that, or you can actually believe that the person that you were communicating with needed to use your mind in order to do the communication. And so it's just like me using your ear, the functions of your inner ear for you to hear my sound. that's how your mind is processing it. And we're just not familiar enough with knowing the difference between our thoughts and others' thoughts. But it actually happens all the time.
Continuously.
When you and I are talking, and every once in a while we'll finish each other's sentences,
Mm-hmm.
that's because I'm totally tuned into you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm following what's going on with you, and I'm so close to that I actually kind of know what you're going to say next. And you do the same thing with me. Or you're struggling on a word and I give you the word, and vice versa, because we're absolutely tuned in with each other. So we can know each other's thoughts. We can send thoughts, and that's kind of the fun thing to be able to learn how to do.
Yeah. And that's, again, what you just described is no different. It's the exact same experience when you're trying to communicate with someone that's not physically present. Because you can have dialogue even when they're here and
Mm-hmm.
you're not seeing them. As I talked about earlier, the experience of feeling my way out to say, well, hey, what's happening with Jeff's energy? Or, hey, what's happening with my brother's energy? It's not a big deal to do that and to feel it. And then, okay, I had that experience. And I want to, it's not different. It's the same. It's the same trust. It's the same allowing of your space to be open. But the other thing I want to define as far as terms are concerned, because I want to make sure it doesn't confuse people, we're talking about thought. And in reality, energetically, thought is, we think thought is linear, but thought is actually concept. Thought is actually multidimensional. It is not linear in any stretch, except in here, coming from thought to translation. Meaning, what makes it linear is that we put words in a row that tell us this. But when you're in the experience with someone like you just shared, the concept is readily available for everyone. My energy in this circumstance, because we're connecting in this fashion to do this podcast, my energy is completely open to you as your energy is open to me. So the concepts that I'm pulling in and talking about are just as accessible to you as they are to me. And so you're going to translate them through your brain as blocks of thought that stimulate different things for you because you have different life experience than I do, but they dovetail. Mm-hmm. And the same again is true of connecting to someone who's not physically here. You have to be willing, that openness to the sensation, when I keep looking for the right word, because it seems like the English language doesn't have quite the right word for that, other than calling it an experience. Because it doesn't traipse around. It doesn't come through the brain like, I want a dog. It's not 4 words connected. It's the experience of what having a dog would be like, and the energy of how that feeling feels coming out of me, how the feeling comes out of the dog, how the experience of us both in the same environment feels like. There's a whole plethora of experiences happening in that idea. And the more we can expand into that and recognize that the choice of language is just a way to find a way to somehow put a sentence on a piece of paper.
Right. I think what I'm hearing you talk about is the science of noetics, all the different ways of knowing something.
There's a thing called noetics.
Yep. You can get lost there. Don't go there. You will get lost.
I won't. But I'm fascinated that there's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The science of noetics and all the different ways of knowing something. In the last couple of weeks, this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I think it's related to what we're talking about. And it's something I've been wanting to talk about in a podcast, so it's finally come up and the opportunity is here.
Right on.
Many podcasts that we've done, we've talked about the division of the subconscious, unconscious, and conscious mind. And I've shared along my journey of going through the different degree programs I have and over the years, being at this for about 25 years, even 10 years ago or so when I was, oh gosh, it's been 15 years ago when I did my doctoral studies, the present percentages, the breakdown was 18% conscious and the other 82% some division of subconscious and unconscious processing. And today the general consensus is 5% conscious, 95% subconscious and unconscious. And that just, again, it's disturbing that to me that the conscious mind is such a small part of all that whole equation. And so when we tie noetics into that discussion, we do know things subconsciously. We do know things unconsciously, but sometimes we don't have the words for it because that's a conscious expression of the knowing. Recently, there's been some data that's come out that says when we're looking, when our eyes are observing something, there are over 125 million bits of information happening in any instant that we're looking at something. 125 million bits of information. And then we add sound to that has another amount of bits of information. I don't remember what the data is on that. It's not as much as vision, but it's still a big number. And then, so each of our senses contribute bits of information per second that our mind is trying to process. And the mind only has the ability to process 5% of everything that's happening. So that matches up perfectly. Those came from two different industries or two different branches within science, whatever you want to call that. But isn't it interesting that we get to 5% as the same number of what we can know and what we can actually process at the same time? So if we push into that, that's saying that 95% of what's happening, we're completely missing because we don't have the capacity to process it. So how much can we really know if we're only getting 5%?
Yeah.
That just cracks me up. That really, really cracks me up. It's like trying to put a puzzle together if you only have picture on 5% and the rest of it is blank. How would you put that puzzle together? So how can we know how much one death is like another? How can we know what soul contracts, if they expire at death or they continue on? How can we know? How we can't know any of this. We really can't. We can only talk about our experiences.
Yeah. And
because we're all having, doesn't that also explain why we're all having such different experiences? Because you're having this 5%, I'm having that 5%, somebody else is having another 5%. They're all probably spot on and right on, but they're just all from different pieces of that puzzle. So they seem like they're so different.
Well, it's just like the whole radio frequency idea. If I'm tuned into Jeff at 98.7 and Paul's over there at 93.2, just because I'm not tuned into Paul doesn't mean he's not playing music.
Right.
Actually, Paul's playing music all the time. I just haven't tuned into that frequency, so I'm not hearing that music. But the one thing to your point that I actually dive into a lot with higher brain living and with my practice, but this takes it to a whole other level. But the idea of it came to me quite a few years ago that the idea of becoming conscious is the adjustment of those percentages, meaning the more conscious, and I wish there was a way, and maybe someday there will be a way that this could actually be measured. And maybe it already has been somewhere along the way. But the idea that as you become more conscious, that percentage increases. So as you bring those, as you go through life and encounter your obstacles or confront things like death is a particularly powerful one because it triggers everybody on every level. Like it's probably one of the few things that can trigger you on so many different levels at the same time. But the whole point of all of that is to stimulate this unconscious awareness stuff, this other 95%, it's trying to bubble up, trying to come into your awareness. And so the more you allow that to happen, and the more you can, and part of that is maybe practicing how you communicate, how you can connect with what's not present to you. Because that's going to trigger all kinds of subconscious and unconscious stuff. Because if you're resistant to it, there's story there. If there's story there, there's subconscious elements that are influencing your decisions and choices. There could actually also be unconscious things that are doing that. But my understanding is that the unconscious stuff is more the stuff that runs. That's running the machinery in the background, meaning the body is being, the heartbeat and all the things that are going on. But anyway, we don't need to go that far. The point being that, so as you begin to march to this call to understanding self, as you march to this desire for transformation or for expanding consciousness, that the whole crux of that is, how do I move 5% to 10%?
Mm-hmm.
And for some, that may be the way to go about it. I want to figure out how to get to 10%.
Oh gosh, okay. Even getting to 6% would be
6%,
20% improvement, right?
Yeah, because I'm saying 10%. We have no idea what that 10% could even possibly.
That could be a Jesus or a Buddha or a Gandhi or a Krishna. We don't know.
We don't know. 6% could be that. We don't. It's, who knows? But either way, that's pretty extraordinary. That there is that much room for, and that much potential for growth and understanding, and more things to make sense, and more dots to connect. And that's just, wow. It's like having a buffet that you couldn't eat everything.
Well, yeah, it's a great example. And if, from my understanding, if we had 100% awareness of everything that was going on, we would know we would be aware of our heartbeat. We would be aware of cell repair. We would be aware of so many things we don't want to be and wouldn't want to be aware of, bowel levels, what color is your poop? All of that stuff would be on our mind all the time.
Well, there was that really cool, what was the movie that Bradley Cooper did? The little pill, the little clear pill he would take.
I remember that. I don't remember the name of the film, but
it'll come to me. But it is exactly what you described. As he continued to take this expanding stuff
mm-hmm.
that elevated the amount of awareness of information, just became overwhelming, because you knew everything. It was too much. It's like, that's a lot of input for the five senses to be able to handle, which could lead to a whole other question, which is not part of the topic, so I'm not going to go there.
I have a couple of thoughts regarding what we have been talking about. Robin Williams did a film. I think the title was What Things Might Be, or What Things May Be, or What Things May Become, or something like that. But it had his ideas, or the director or writer's understanding of, if you think there's a hell, you will have the opportunity to experience that for however long you want to or need to experience it when you transition. And in the film, it showed a variety of people leaving the planet as they were transitioning or graduating. And some went to a nirvana experience. Some went into a hospital kind of a setting where they had an adjustment from the physical to the metaphysical or spiritual. And some went to this deep, dark, creepy place, like zombie apocalypse-ish sort of thing. But what was interesting is there was choice involved. And once people realized they were there because they felt that they did such naughty things here on the planet, they needed to be punished, that the universe gave them that opportunity to have that experience until they decided enough was enough. And then they got to join the party with everybody else. And there was a reason I was going to share all of that, but in going to all those details, I lost my way here just for a moment. But where I was going to tie this back to with your dad.
I was going to say, was this about
Yeah.
Nothing
Yeah.
to connect initially.
That, right now, if he thought he was naughty and he thought he needed to have more of a negative experience following all of this, maybe that is like solitary confinement, and it's in a part of the universe that connection isn't possible. It's a dead cell range. There's just no cell coverage there, so that he gets to experience that. But what I really would like to believe is that it's temporary, and that if you keep ringing him up a year from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, one day I hope you'll be able to tell me, hey, guess who I got a hold of today?
Mm-hmm. Well, and just the amount of progress from yesterday to today, or even within the last couple days to today, I can't say that I feel the connection, but I definitely have more of a sense of what seems to be transpiring. And to me, I would translate, based on all the studies that I've done, that to me, that space that you're talking about is what I would call the astral plane, the place where the between here and there place, which I'm guessing are probably lots of variations of defrag, depending on your circumstance, depending on how you left, depending on what you left, whatever your attachments. That there's a logic to that makes sense to me, because the whole, based on everything that I've read and studied, that this being the leading edge of experience here in this human experience. Well, if that's the case, and that's really what this is, then that means that what transpires here is important. It's important to evolution as a whole. It's important to my personal soul growth, but my contribution as a soul to the larger whatever it is, to the universe, to God, to whatever. That this whole process of experience is contributing to that. It's contributing to the further expansion and understanding. So those so that all of us, all of the experiences are important in that regard. So if there's a transition period, maybe there was a lot to, I can see it in my dad particularly, the absolute kind of what's the word, the kind of unresolvable conflict that he had in his, he compartmentalized to be able to function. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like the guy was this mean, angry, horrible human being. I mean, he was actually, had an amazing personality. He was very engaging. People, enjoyed being around him. He was a lot of fun. And he had other issues. But the idea that the sense that I have of kind of processing, or in another reality kind of dealing, or I don't know if it's dealing with, or like you said, it's just whatever the mindset was so powerful that he's in that mindset space. That mindset is what's holding him on the astral until he can resolve it at whatever juncture that happens, and however long that takes, or whatever, who knows. Again, conjecture, but just, again, that's what the feeling your way into it is, because inside of me, those connections make sense. Inside of me, those ideas connect dots and make sense to my reality in a way that is soothing and uplifting and complementary and forward moving. So even if I'm making it up, I'm getting a lot of good result out of making it up. And I'm okay with that. And I encourage all of you out there who may be listening to be okay with that. Because it's your process, it's your experience. And there are enough similarities in each of our experiences that you can get tons of validation by talking to people about your experience. It just may not be identical, but it'll be close.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Good topic. Good topic. And it's, it's relevant to everyone. We will all experience it.
Yes. And boy, does that's, I think that's another whole deal going there, because that's been a fascinating exploration. We talked a bit about that in the last episode about dying too, and how it just stimulates the thought process. And if you could, part of that sensitivity that I was talking about earlier, the willingness to feel into somebody who's not there,
Mm-hmm.
is willingness to confront whatever concepts you have about death, being willing to entertain whatever ideas show up about it. I could list pages and pages and pages of things that have come up for me, thoughts, feelings, ideas, concepts, everything from, like I was sharing earlier, seeing that spectacular light off of the mountains and seeing the hues of green that just bring such an amazing feeling to my being, and having that be followed up with, what if this is your last moment? Is this going to be your last moment? Will they feel like this, or will it feel like something else? You can go in a really dark place with that, or you can just observe it for what it is and move on. You can observe it and see that it's there and not give it a whole lot of credence, but know that, okay, there's stuff brewing there. Let's let that percolate until it comes to something that makes a little more sense.
Right.
And it may never. I don't know, because it's an exploration that while it doesn't always feel good. Okay, here we go with paradoxes. While it doesn't always feel good, it really feels good. Because in the end, it doesn't leave me in fear.
Right.
End of sentence. It doesn't leave me in fear. Anticipation, curiosity, conundrum, but not fear. And that to me is huge.
Absolutely.
Huge.
No fear. It's where we want to be.
Yeah. Feeling like we've wrung the energy out of this round of conversation. What do you think?
I would agree. Absolutely.
Both
Yes.
at that. I don't even know. I'm going to turn the recap over to you, because I don't even know where to go to recap this. You did a lot of listening, so hopefully.
Well, I like that we were bold enough on our adventure today to step into and continue talking about things that I'm sure people have heard about, dabbled with, wondered about. We're just given some words and concepts, principles from things we've wondered about, read about, heard about, and experienced. This notion of what happens when we're not here any longer. Can we tap into that? Can we connect with it? Is it okay? And that's one thing I'd love to say is in my churching over the years, in believing that we weren't supposed to do that, my gosh, every time, without exception, I'm looking straight into the camera right now. It has been so moving in a peaceful, loving, blessed. I'm getting goosebumps right now in this moment. You want to learn how to do this. You really do.
Yeah.
Really, really do. It is life enhancing to know that. I mean, really, if it's bad, why would it feel that good? Why would it? I have had no bad thing come from it, and no one that has wanted to learn how to do this and come in and believed that it was possible ever called me later and said, gee, I really wish you wouldn't have shown me how to do that. Or now that I've opened that channel, mom won't get off my back and she's yelling at. I mean, that's just never happened. Never happened. And why would it? Why would that happen?
Right.
So we're not opening something up. It's not Pandora's box. It's not the door to hell. I mean, it's only positive. It's really just only positive. That's really all I have to say about that. And if you're still listening to the podcast since we started today, and you haven't had the opportunity, perhaps we'll do a little bit more in the future on practical steps to do it. But listen to the podcast again. Jim and I both gave some both concepts, principles, and the step-by-step experiential applications and examples. We gave it all in how to do this. So if you didn't pick it up the first time through, go back, rewind, fast forward to the parts where we're actually talking about the step-by-step process. And in quick summary of that, Jim talked about if you used to talk to mom on the phone all the time, then pick up the phone and pretend you're talking to mom and notice what comes back. And I would say maybe if you have a physical object, not that there's magic in it, but it'll just open up. If you have something of mom's that you could hold on to or look at or resonate with, that will help the part of the mind that says you're making it up. Mm-hmm. It'll distract it enough to maybe at least give the reason that it's happening is because you're holding mom's ring in your hand. I had a lady bring in some scarves recently, and she held a scarf and I held a scarf, and we opened up the channel, and guess what? There was mom. And it had nothing to do with the scarves.
No, but I will say that for the individual, that scarf may hold the significance because it puts you in the state of allowing that energy to show up.
Yep. It's just an enhancer.
Yep.
And then, of course, mom would be touched by, oh, you still have my scarf. And I remember wearing that. And when she's remember wearing that, then that feeling hits the people who are tuned into it. And then you feel that. And it's really nice. You might even get a little vision of a time when mom wore that scarf, or where she was when she bought it, or the significance behind it. So, and then you're on your way. Once you know that the door's open and you can step through it, you're on your way.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I would bring this to a close by saying one of the most empowering, consciousness expanding things you can do is confronting death. When I say confronting death, I mean how you as a person feel about it, what your experience is of it, and by allowing yourself to find ways to communicate with people who are not present any longer, you're confronting the things that literally drive all of the things you do in your life, because that inordinate amount of fear that's trained into us from the time we come out, the fear and anxiety that's trained into us about that has our subconscious trained to that. Mm-hmm. So every time it comes up, you go into a defensive space because it's a bad thing. And what we're trying to get you to realize is that it's not at all a bad thing. It's death is a transition, but our ability to process it gives us the ability to experience things on a scale that prior to that you never could have accessed.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would like to kind of close it at that, just to say it's that important.
Yeah.
It really is that. And it seems like the backwards way to go, but actually in confronting it, you release all of your potential because you're now no longer confined to a restricted window of what you think you need to do.
Sure. And I think we've done it before many, many times. I think we've been on the other side, and we've been willing to reach and connect with our loved ones here on the planet or on any other planet that we can possibly go to. And I also think that we spend more time in that life between lives than we do in an incarnated body state. So it's actually probably more natural to us to be able to do that than we have any idea.
I like that. Good stuff. Thank you, all of you out there that are listening and participating with us and connecting with us.
Yeah. Jim, I want to thank you also for your continued showing up with your real world, real life examples that we're using as topics for our adventures.
Love it. Love it. Love it. I figure that's the way the universe supports us, as we have our life experiences to bring to the table and share with, because we're all having them. So might as well find out where our commonalities are and how to take it from where it is to where we want to be. So,
yep. Blessings to you.
And to you, have a great afternoon, and we'll look forward to connecting with you all. If you have comments, please leave them. Check out our website, www.adventuresintruthpodcast.com, and we'll see you again real soon.
All righty. Goodbye, everyone.